The Arizona Territory, 1875. A daughter sacrificed for land. Sarah Matthews stood trembling at the edge of the Apache camp, her white dress billowing in the desert wind. Her father's words still rang in her ears. "He'll take you as payment, or he'll take our lives instead." 17 years of sheltered existence had not prepared her for this moment. Across the clearing stood Takoda, the feared Apache warrior whose very name made settlers bolt their doors at night. His dark eyes assessed her without emotion, scars telling stories of battles won and enemies fallen. When he approached, Sarah closed her eyes, awaiting her fate. But instead of claiming what was offered, he placed a blanket around her shoulders and turned away. What secret pain drove this warrior to protect what others would exploit? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years earlier, the Matthews family had arrived in Arizona Territory with dreams as vast as the landscape. Thomas Matthews, a former schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, had inherited enough money from a distant uncle to purchase land and start anew. The desert was nothing like the lush Pennsylvania countryside, but the promise of ownership, of legacy, had been too tempting to resist. Sarah remembered the journey west, the endless rocking of the wagon, her mother's quiet determination, her father's animated stories of prosperity awaiting them. At 14, she had been old enough to understand they were leaving everything familiar behind, yet young enough to believe in her father's promises of a better life. The family Bible had traveled with them, wrapped carefully in her mother's shawl. Each night on the trail, her mother would read from it by firelight, her finger tracing the names recorded inside. Generations of Matthews who had come before, who had faced their own wildernesses and survived. Sarah's name was there too, alongside her younger brothers, James and William, ages 12 and 9. "Your life is part of something larger," her mother often said. Every Matthews has faced their trials with dignity. The trial facing them now was the land itself. What had seemed a bargain had proven a burden. The soil was unforgiving, the rains unpredictable. Thomas Matthews had no experience with desert farming, and his learning came at a steep price. Debts mounted. The boys grew lean from work beyond their years. Only Sarah seemed to thrive in her way. Her mother continued her education, teaching from the few books they'd brought west. Sarah learned to identify desert plants, to treat minor wounds, to make meals from scant provisions. While her father struggled with the land, Sarah found unexpected beauty in its harshness. They were not entirely alone. A small settlement had formed 10 miles east, a collection of hopeful families, a general store, and a part-time preacher who doubled as the schoolteacher. Sarah rarely visited, her help needed at home, her mother insistent that a young woman required protection from the rougher elements of frontier life. It was during the second year that Sarah first heard of the Apache. The name was whispered among settlers who passed through, stories exchanged of raids on distant homesteads, of warriors who appeared like desert spirits and vanished just as quickly. "They were here first," her mother had said quietly when her father joined in the fearful talk. "We would do well to remember that." Her father had responded with uncharacteristic sharpness. "Being first doesn't grant endless claim, Martha. The land belongs to those who make something of it." The argument was unusual. Her parents rarely disagreed openly, and it ended with her mother's tight-lipped silence. Sarah sensed deeper currents she couldn't fathom. The water came from a spring that emerged from rock at the property's eastern edge, a small miracle in the desert. It was enough for their modest needs and to irrigate a small patch of crops, but as the drought worsened during their third year, the spring's flow diminished. That was when the troubles truly began. Sarah first noticed the tracks one morning, moccasin prints near the spring. Her father found them too, his face darkening as he knelt to examine them. "They have no right," he muttered. "This is our water now." 2 days later, he returned from the settlement with a rifle and a locked box of ammunition. That night, Sarah overheard her parents speaking in hushed tones. They say he stands a head taller than most men, her father whispered. Takoda, they call him. Led raids during the cavalry conflicts years back. The scar across his face came from a soldier's saber. One man's raid is another's defense of home, her mother replied. Don't start with that, Martha. Not now. The others are talking about forming a militia. And what good would that bring? More bloodshed. There are other ways. Jenkins mentioned making arrangements. What arrangements? Her father hadn't answered. The silence stretched until Sarah, hiding in the shadows of the hallway, thought they must have fallen asleep. Then her father spoke again, his voice so low she barely caught the words. Jenkins gave his daughter to a Cherokee chief back in Oklahoma Territory. Said it secured peace for 3 counties. Sarah heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, followed by quiet sobbing. That night, Sarah dreamed of faceless men on horseback circling their cabin. In the dream, she stood at the window watching them, her family asleep behind her. One rider broke from the circle and approached. A tall figure, face in shadow. She should have been afraid, but in the strange logic of dreams, she felt only curiosity as she unlatched the door. Takoda sat alone on the rocky outcrop above the camp, fingers absently tracing the medicine pouch that hung around his neck. Inside were items few had seen. A lock of black hair from his wife, Kimmy. A tiny deerskin moccasin that had once covered his son's foot. A stone from the river where they had died. The pouch kept them close, though 5 winters had passed since the cavalry raid that took them. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of fire. In this light, the land looked as it had before the white settlers came. Vast, unbroken, belonging to no man. Takoda knew better. The world was changing around them, had been changing since before his birth, and would continue changing long after he returned to the earth. Unlike some elders who remembered only the old ways, Takoda had seen enough of both worlds to know that survival required adaptation. He had learned the white man's language in his youth from a missionary who had treated him with unusual respect. The knowledge served him well during conflicts, though few settlers knew of his ability to understand them. Better to be underestimated, to hear their true thoughts. Those thoughts were rarely kind. To them, he was the scarred one, a savage to be feared. The cavalry officer who had given him the scar had called him animal names while the blade cut deep. Takoda had killed the man, but the name remained, passed between settlers like a warning. The irony did not escape him. Before the raid that took his family, he had been known among his people for his laughter, for stories told around evening fires, for gentleness with children. Now, his own people gave him space, respected his leadership but feared his silences. Only the very old and very young approached him without hesitation. Kiowa, his cousin and closest confidant, climbed up to join him. "The council is gathering," he said. "They wish to discuss the water issue." Takoda nodded, tucking the medicine pouch back beneath his shirt. "They want war or peace?" "They want water," Kiowa replied simply. "The drought continues. The smaller springs have failed. The Matthews Spring still flows." The name brought to mind the image Takoda had glimpsed 3 days prior, a young woman with hair the color of desert honey, kneeling by a wounded quail near the spring. She had splinted its broken wing with strands of grass and a twig, her movements gentle and sure. When finished, she had carried the bird away, presumably to care for it until healed. He had not mentioned the encounter to anyone. Such softness seemed private, not for sharing. And it complicated the image of the settlers as uniformly destructive. "What would you have us do, brother?" Kiowa asked. Takoda stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting too long. "I would have rain fall. I would have the white men leave. I would have Kimmy and my son alive." Kiowa's face softened. "And of things that might actually happen? We negotiate first," Takoda said. "There has been enough blood." The council meeting lasted well into the night. Elder voices called for patience, for diplomatic approaches. Younger warriors argued for shows of strength. Takoda listened more than he spoke, weighing the needs of his people against the likely outcomes of each path. The settlers respect only force, argued Neshoba, a warrior in his prime. We should take what we need. And bring soldiers down upon us all? Countered Ahote, the eldest of the council. We have seen where that path leads. The spring was ours before they came, said Neshoba, and will be ours after they are gone, Ahote replied, if we are wise enough to outlast them. After much debate, they reached consensus. Takoda would lead a delegation to the boundary marker between their lands and present their case for water sharing. If refused, they would consider more forceful options. As the council dispersed, Ahote remained behind with Takoda. There is talk among our scouts, the old man said. The Matthews man has been to the settlement several times, speaking with men known for their hatred of our people. Planning an attack? Perhaps, Ahote said, or perhaps something else. There are old ways of making peace between peoples, ways that involve exchange. Takoda frowned. What exchange? The Matthews have a daughter. Understanding dawned, bringing with it a cold anger. They would give their child to those they fear as savages? It has happened before, Ahote said. The whites sometimes understand only ownership. They see women as property to be traded. And you suggest I accept such an offer? Ahote's aged face revealed nothing. I suggest you remember that sometimes, to save many, we must do what seems distasteful. If such an offer comes, consider what refusing might mean for our people. Later, alone again with the night sky, Takoda thought of the girl he had seen tending the wounded bird. He thought of Kimi, of the son who never had the chance to grow into a man. He thought of all that had been taken, and what he might be asked to take in turn. The boundary marker was nothing more than a pile of stones at the edge of a small rise, yet it might as well have been a fortress wall for the tension it represented. On one side stood Thomas Matthews, flanked by 3 men from the settlement. On the other, Takoda and 4 Apache, including Elder Ahote. Sarah watched from a distance, having followed her father despite his orders to remain at the cabin. Hidden behind a large saguaro, she strained to hear the exchange. The spring has been on deeded land for 3 years now, her father was saying, voice carrying in the still desert air. The government recognizes our claim. The tallest Apache, Takoda, she presumed, noting the scar that bisected his left cheek, responded in accented but clear English. The water flowed for our people for generations before papers existed. One of the settlement men, Marshal Wade, stepped forward. His hand rested too casually near his holstered pistol. Your people lost any claim when they chose to raid peaceful settlements. You're lucky the army hasn't relocated the lot of you. Sarah noticed how Takoda's eyes flickered briefly to Wade's hand, then back to her father. The Apache warrior's face betrayed nothing, but she sensed controlled anger in his stillness. The eldest Apache spoke in their language. Takoda translated, though Sarah suspected he softened the words. Elder Ahote says the drought affects all people, not just yours. The Creator did not intend water to be owned, but shared. Sharing implies both sides have rights, her father replied. What do we get in return for our water? Peace, Takoda said simply. Wade spat on the ground. Sounds like a threat to me, Matthews. These savages need to be taught. That's enough, Wade, her father interrupted. We came to talk, not provoke. Sarah had never seen Marshal Wade before, but she'd heard of him. A former cavalry scout with a reputation for ruthlessness, he'd settled in the territory after the last Apache conflicts. Rumor said he collected Apache artifacts, and had not acquired them through trade. There may be an arrangement possible, her father continued, wiping sweat from his brow. But I need time to consider terms. Takoda nodded once. 3 days. Then we return for your answer. As the Apache delegation turned to leave, Wade called after them. You people better understand this territory's changing. Armies got new orders about hostiles. Push too hard, and you won't have to worry about water anymore. Takoda paused but didn't turn. One of the younger Apache muttered something, hand moving toward his knife. Takoda placed a restraining hand on his companion's arm and continued walking. When the Apache were out of sight, Wade rounded on her father. You're not actually considering giving them access, are you? Show weakness once. They'll bleed you dry. It's my land, Wade. My decision. It's all our problem if they think they can intimidate one of us. Wade gestured to the other settlers. Jenkins lost 2 cows last month. Stolen or strayed makes no difference if they end up feeding Apache. No proof it was them, muttered the older of the 2 other men. Who else? Wade demanded. Look, Matthews, I've dealt with their kind before. There's only one language they truly understand. Sarah's father looked tired suddenly, older than his 43 years. And what would you suggest? Form a militia. 20 men from the settlement. Show of force. 20 men against how many Apache warriors? And then what, bring the army down on all our heads when blood spills? No. Her father shook his head. There are other solutions. Wade's eyes narrowed. Like Jenkins used in Oklahoma? That kind of solution. An uncomfortable silence fell. Sarah held her breath, suddenly certain they were discussing her, though no names had been mentioned. I'll handle this my way, her father finally said. 3 days. As the men departed, Sarah remained hidden, mind racing. That evening, she helped her mother prepare dinner, watching her parents exchange meaningful glances across the table. Her brothers, oblivious, argued over who would get to break the new colt their father had purchased. After the boys were asleep, Sarah sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the starlit desert. From this distance, the boundary between their land and the Apache territory was invisible. The same stars shone over all of it. She wondered what it would be like to cross that invisible line, to walk into the unknown. A shiver ran through her that wasn't entirely fear. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask her mother directly about the arrangement she'd overheard mentioned. Better to face the truth than live with shadowed suspicions. Sarah never got the chance to ask her mother about the arrangement. That evening, her father called a family meeting in their small parlor. James and William were sent to bed early despite their protests, leaving Sarah alone with her parents. Sit down, Sarah, her father said, his voice gentler than she'd heard it in months. Her mother sat rigid in her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes red-rimmed. Sarah's stomach knotted with dread. You know we've been having troubles with the Apache over water rights, her father began. Sarah nodded. I saw the meeting yesterday. I followed you. Her father's expression tightened, but he didn't scold her. Then you understand the situation is serious. The settlement is divided. Some, like Wade, want conflict. I don't. Your mother doesn't. Thomas, her mother whispered, a plea in her voice. He continued as if he hadn't heard. There's a way to secure peace to guarantee our safety and our water. An old way, practiced by settlers and natives alike for generations. Sarah's mouth went dry. What way? Marriage, he said simply. Or something like it. The word hung in the air between them. Sarah looked from her father to her mother, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. You want me to marry one of them? The Apache man with the scar? Not exactly marriage as we think of it, her father said, not meeting her eyes. More of an arrangement. You would go to live with him, as a gesture of our commitment to peace. As a hostage, Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. As a bond between peoples, her father corrected. Takoda is their most respected warrior. He has influence. With you under his protection, no Apache would dare threaten our land. And if I refuse? Her father's jaw tightened. This isn't a request, Sarah. The decision is made. Martha. Sarah turned to her mother, desperate for support. Her mother finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. I fought against this, Sarah. But your father believes, we both believe, it's the only way to protect the boys, to keep our land. What about protecting me? The question came out smaller than Sarah intended. Her father stood abruptly. You'll be 17 next month. Many girls your age are already wives and mothers. The Apache treat their women better than most think. You'll have food, shelter. I'll be a slave, Sarah whispered. You'll be alive, her father countered. We'll all be alive. Wade and his faction are pushing for war. If that happens, do you think any of us will be spared? Sarah felt as if she were drowning, struggling for air in the suffocating silence of the room. Outside, the desert night continued undisturbed. Inside, her world collapsed. That night, she poured her thoughts into her journal by candlelight, the one place she could express her true feelings. The pages bore witness to her terror, her sense of betrayal, her desperate prayers. When words failed, her tears stained the paper. Morning brought no reprieve. Her mother helped her pack a small bundle. A change of clothes, her hairbrush, a small mirror, her journal and pencil. No books. They might see it as an insult, her father explained. As if their ways aren't good enough. Sarah said nothing. She hadn't spoken since the previous night. The white dress had been her mother's idea. It shows your innocence, she'd explained haltingly. Your purity. It might matter to them. The dress was too big, made for a woman with more curves than Sarah's slender frame. Her mother pinned it hastily, her fingers trembling. I'll pray for you every day, her mother whispered, embracing her. God will watch over you. Sarah couldn't bring herself to respond. Where was God in this transaction? Her brothers were told only that Sarah was going to live with the Apache to help secure peace. William cried and clung to her legs. James, trying to be manly at 12, shook her hand formally, then broke down and hugged her fiercely. I'll come get you someday, he promised. When I'm bigger. 2 neighbors arrived to accompany them. Mr. Jenkins, who had apparently made a similar arrangement with his own daughter in Oklahoma, and Mr. Foster, who owned the general store. Neither would meet Sarah's eyes. As they prepared to leave, Sarah caught sight of herself in the hall mirror. The white dress, her hair brushed until it shone, her face pale with fear. She looked like a sacrifice being led to an altar. In a way, she supposed she was. The journey to the Apache camp took less than 2 hours, though to Sarah it felt like crossing into another world. The landscape remained familiar, the same desert she had known for 3 years, but her perspective had shifted. Every cactus, every rock formation now marked the path to her new life, one she hadn't chosen. They stopped at the boundary marker. Her father dismounted and helped Sarah down from her horse. Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Foster remained mounted, rifles across their laps, eyes scanning the horizon nervously. We wait here, her father said. They'll come to us. Sarah stood silently, the white dress billowing around her legs in the gentle breeze. She hadn't cried since leaving home, wouldn't give her father the satisfaction of seeing her break. They didn't wait long, for Apache riders appeared, seeming to materialize from the heat-shimmered distance. Takoda led them, unmistakable even from afar with his height and proud bearing. As they drew closer, Sarah studied the man who was to become her. What? Master? Husband? Jailer? The Apache had no word in their language that precisely matched what she was to be. Her father had explained awkwardly. Takoda dismounted with fluid grace, his dark eyes taking in the scene. Sarah in her white dress, her father's nervous stance, the armed men watching from horseback. If he was surprised by their purpose, he didn't show it. Matthews, he greeted her father with a slight nod. Takoda, her father replied. We've come to offer terms for peace between our peoples. I see. Takoda's gaze shifted to Sarah, his expression unreadable. Her father cleared his throat. "My daughter, Sarah. She will stay with your people, with you, as a bond of peace between us." One of the Apache behind Takoda spoke rapidly in their language. Takoda responded without taking his eyes off Sarah. The exchange continued briefly, voices rising. "Is there a problem?" her father asked tensely. "Some of my people question your gift," Takoda said, choosing his words carefully. "They wonder what trap you set." "No trap," her father insisted. "It's a genuine offer. The water is yours to share if you accept." Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation. She was being bartered for water rights, her value measured in gallons per day. Takoda approached her slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. When he stood before her, Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were not cold, as she had expected, but thoughtful, assessing. "You agree to this?" he asked her directly, surprising everyone. The question, the first time anyone had considered her consent relevant, caught Sarah off guard. She glanced at her father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I," she swallowed hard. "I do what must be done for my family." Something flickered in Takoda's expression, respect, perhaps, or pity. He turned back to her father. "She will not be harmed," he said. "You have my word." Her father's relief was palpable. "Then we have an agreement. The spring is available to your people from sunrise to midday, every day." The practical discussion of water rights in the same breath as her fate made Sarah's stomach turn. As the men finalized details, she stood apart, feeling increasingly invisible. When the time came to say goodbye, her father embraced her stiffly. "Be brave," he whispered. "Remember you're doing this for all of us." Sarah didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She watched him mount his horse and ride away with the other men, not once looking back. Part of her had hoped for a last-minute change of heart, a dramatic rescue. None came. Left alone with Takoda and his companions, Sarah trembled despite the desert heat. Takoda observed her for a long moment, then removed a woven blanket from his horse. Approaching Sarah again, he placed it gently around her shoulders. "Night comes with cold," he said. "You keep." The unexpected gesture of consideration left Sarah speechless. One of the other Apache said something that sounded like a question. "You ride with me," Takoda told her, gesturing to his horse. "Camp not far." Clutching the blanket around her shoulders, Sarah allowed him to help her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His presence at her back was solid but carefully distant, maintaining as much space as the shared saddle allowed. As they rode toward the Apache camp, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Sarah stared straight ahead, focusing on the horizon rather than the uncertain future it held. The camp appeared gradually, a collection of structures more substantial than the temporary teepees she had imagined. Some were traditional wickiups made of brush and earth, others more permanent structures of wood and stone. People emerged as they approached, curious faces watching the white girl in her now dusty dress. Children pointed and whispered. Women stood in doorways, expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Takoda helped her dismount at the center of the camp. "You stay," he said simply. "No harm." Sarah clutched the blanket tighter, her only shield against the stares of strangers. Whatever she had expected, immediate degradation, perhaps, or being claimed like property, wasn't happening. Instead, Takoda maintained a respectful distance, his manner neither threatening nor particularly welcoming. Just as the silence grew unbearable, an elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined but her eyes sharp and assessing. She spoke to Takoda, who responded briefly. "Nyabi," he said to Sarah, gesturing to the woman. "She help you. She speaks some English." With that introduction, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone with the old woman and her uncertain future. Niobe's wrinkled hand was surprisingly strong as she guided Sarah through the camp. The old woman walked with a slight limp but maintained a pace that had Sarah hurrying to keep up. "You sleep here," Niobe said, gesturing to a small wickiup set slightly apart from the others. "Woman place. Safe." The structure looked sturdy enough, with brush walls and what appeared to be a smoke hole at the top. A hide covering served as a door. "Takoda, he not?" Sarah struggled to form the question delicately. Niobe's eyes crinkled with unexpected amusement. "Takoda not share with you. Not his way." She made a dismissive gesture. "Men think with pride, not sense. You rest now. Tomorrow work." Work. Of course there would be work. Sarah hadn't expected to be idle, though what tasks awaited her remained a mystery. She ducked into the wickiup to find a simple sleeping mat covered with woven blankets. Her small bundle of possessions had somehow arrived before her. The space was clean if spare. No locks on the door, not that a hide covering could be locked, but the message was clear enough. She wasn't a prisoner, at least not in the conventional sense. Sleep came in fitful bursts that first night. Every unfamiliar sound startled her awake. Coyotes in the distance, the murmur of voices around cooking fires, the rustle of wind through the brush walls. When dawn finally broke, Sarah had resigned herself to exhaustion. Niobe appeared as the first light touched the eastern horizon. "Come. Water first." Sarah followed the old woman to a cooking area where a clay pot sat on warm stones. Several women worked nearby, some grinding seeds between stones, others weaving baskets. All paused to stare at Sarah, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open distrust. Niobe handed Sarah a wooden cup of water, then gestured to a large clay cooking pot nestled among the stones. "You help." The pot was used for cooking a thin porridge made from ground seeds and what looked like dried berries. Sarah watched carefully as Niobe demonstrated how to stir the mixture with a wooden paddle to prevent burning. "Like so," the old woman said, handing Sarah the paddle. "You do." Sarah took over the stirring, grateful for a simple task to focus on. As she worked, a young girl of perhaps 5 approached, studying her with unabashed fascination. "Nuthapi asks if your hair is made of sunshine." Niobe translated the child's question. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. "Tell her it's just regular hair that happens to be yellow." Niobe spoke to the child, who giggled and reached out to touch a strand of Sarah's blonde hair that had escaped her braid. The simple, innocent interaction eased something tight in Sarah's chest. When the porridge was finished, Niobe showed Sarah how to serve it into smaller bowls. Women came first, then children, collecting their morning meal. The men, Sarah noticed, were served by women who appeared to be their wives or daughters. "Who serves Takoda?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. "Takoda serves self," Niobe replied. "No woman since Kimi died. So he was a widower." The information made him more human somehow, less the fearsome warrior of legend. After the morning meal, Sarah was put to work collecting firewood with 2 younger women who introduced themselves as Talyuta and Diani. Neither spoke English, but they communicated through gestures, showing Sarah which dead wood to gather and how to carry it efficiently. The work was familiar enough. She'd gathered wood at home too, but the desert heat made it more challenging. By midday, Sarah's fair skin had reddened despite the head covering Niobe had insisted she wear. Her hands bore fresh blisters from the rough wood. Still, there was satisfaction in the neat pile she'd contributed to the communal wood stack. Talyuta noticed her raw hands and beckoned Sarah to follow. At a small structure that seemed to serve as a medicine lodge, the young woman applied a pungent salve to Sarah's blisters. The immediate cooling relief brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you," she said, though she knew Talyuta wouldn't understand the words. The woman nodded anyway, seeming to recognize gratitude in any language. It was during the afternoon water collection that Sarah first encountered open hostility. She had been shown how to carry water in tightly woven baskets sealed with pine pitch from a small seep spring near the camp. As she worked alongside several women, a tall, muscular Apache man approached. His face was set in hard lines, his eyes cold as they fixed on Sarah. He spoke sharply to the other women, who lowered their eyes and stepped back from Sarah. Only Niobe remained by her side. "Who is he?" Sarah whispered. "Keem, Takoda cousin." Niobe replied quietly. "He not like white girl here." Keem addressed Sarah directly in Apache, his tone clearly challenging. When she didn't respond, he switched to broken English. "You spy. You bring soldiers. You not belong." Before Sarah could defend herself, Niobe stepped forward, her small frame somehow imposing as she faced the much larger man. She spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing occasionally towards Sarah. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. The old woman was defending her presence. Keem responded angrily, pointing at Sarah several times. The argument continued until a shadow fell across them. Takoda stood at the edge of the spring, his expression neutral but his presence commanding immediate attention. He spoke a single word, and Keem fell silent, though his glare at Sarah remained venomous. The two men exchanged words, Takoda's tone even but firm. Finally, Keem stalked away, shoulder brushing roughly against Sarah as he passed. "He says I'm a spy," Sarah said to Takoda, finding her voice. "Some fear what they do not know," Takoda replied. His gaze swept over the water carriers, who had all stopped to watch the confrontation. "Continue work." As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. "Thank you." Takoda paused, looking back at her with an unreadable expression. "For what?" "For stopping him. For defending me." "I defend peace," he corrected. "You are part of peace." It wasn't a particularly comforting clarification, but it was honest. Sarah watched him walk away, realizing she was nothing more to him than a treaty obligation. A human boundary marker. A week passed, then another. The rhythms of Apache life gradually became familiar to Sarah. The pre-dawn rising, the communal meals, the division of labor that kept the camp functioning. Women's work wasn't so different here than it had been at home. Cooking, gathering, tending children, making and mending. What differed was the sense of community. Where Sarah had worked mostly alone at the ranch, here women gathered in groups, talking and laughing as they worked. Not that Sarah was fully included in this camaraderie. Most women still regarded her with caution, though open hostility had largely subsided. Children were less reserved, especially after Sarah began teaching them simple English words in exchange for Apache ones. "Son," she would say, pointing upward. "Shandian," they would reply, giggling at her attempts to repeat the unfamiliar sounds. Her white dress had become impractical within days. While gathering firewood, Sarah caught the hem on a thorny branch, tearing a long gash up the side. She tried to mend it that evening, but her sewing skills were rudimentary at best. Niobe had watched her struggles with amusement before disappearing into her own dwelling. She returned with a bundle of soft deerskin clothing, a long tunic-like dress and leggings similar to what the Apache women wore. "White dress no good here," Niobe stated. "This better." Sarah hesitated, fingering the soft leather. To abandon her own clothing felt like surrendering another piece of her identity, another step away from her old life. "Problem?" Niobe asked, noting her reluctance. "No, it's just—" Sarah struggled to articulate the complex emotions. "This dress is all I brought from home." Niobe's weathered face softened. "Home is where you are, not what you wear." She tapped her chest over her heart. "Keep old things here, not on body." The practical wisdom was hard to argue with. The next morning, Sarah put on the Apache clothing. The softness against her skin was a revelation after the stiff white cotton. The tunic allowed freer movement for work, and the leggings protected her legs from scratches and sunburn. When she emerged from her wickiup, several children stared, then broke into excited chatter. Talyuta, gathering nearby, gave an approving nod. Even some of the more standoffish women seemed to regard her with slightly less suspicion. It was mid-morning when Sarah realized Takoda was watching her from the edge of the camp. He stood in the shade of a mesquite tree, his tall figure almost motionless. When she met his gaze, he didn't look away, as most would, but continued his calm assessment. Sarah straightened her shoulders and continued with her task, oddly self-conscious. She hadn't spoken directly to Takoda since the incident at the spring. He kept largely to himself, she'd noticed, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark. The few times she'd seen him in camp, he'd been engaged in council with other men or working alone on weapons and tools. That evening, Niobe approached as Sarah helped prepare the evening meal. "Takoda wants talk," the old woman said. "After food." Sarah's heart quickened. "About what?" Niobe shrugged. "Ask him, not me." After the meal was served, Sarah found Takoda sitting alone by a small fire at the camp's edge. He looked up as she approached, gesturing for her to sit on a flat stone opposite him. "You wear Apache clothes now," he observed. Sarah smoothed the deerskin tunic. "My dress tore. Niobe gave me these. They are better for desert." An awkward silence fell. Sarah studied Takoda covertly in the firelight. His face was all angles and planes, the scar a pale line against his copper skin. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, yet there was something compelling about his features, a quiet strength that drew the eye. "Niobe said you wanted to speak with me," Sarah prompted when the silence stretched too long. Takoda nodded. "You have been here 2 weeks. No trouble." "Did you expect trouble?" A faint smile touched his lips. "White women often find our ways difficult." "You've known many white women?" "Some. Captives, mostly." He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the night air. "You are not captive. What am I, then?" The question had burned in Sarah since her arrival. Takoda considered before answering. "You are bridge between your people and mine." "A human bridge," Sarah murmured. "That's an interesting way to see it." "Not comfortable position," he acknowledged, "but important." Sarah was surprised by his perception. "The water arrangement is working? My father is keeping his word." "Yes. Apache go to spring each morning. No problems yet." Takoda studied her face. "Your father not tell you why Apache need water so badly?" Sarah shook her head. "Just that there was a dispute over rights. 3 seasons with little rain. Small springs dry up. Game animals move away. Without Matthew's spring, many would suffer. Children would suffer most." The simple explanation put everything in clearer perspective. This wasn't just about territorial rights or pride, it was about survival. "I've noticed the food stores seem low," Sarah ventured. "The women seem worried when they inventory them." Takoda looked surprised at her observation. "You see much." "I try to understand where I am." Sarah paused, then added, "I may not have chosen to be here, but I can choose to be useful." Something like respect flickered in Takoda's dark eyes. He reached for a pouch at his belt and extracted a handful of seeds, holding them out to Sarah. "Know these?" Sarah examined the small, round seeds. "They look like a type of grain, but I don't recognize them specifically. Apache call them strength seeds. Good food, but hard to prepare. Women say not worth effort when easier food available." "But now easier food isn't available," Sarah guessed. Takoda nodded. "You know how to make bread?" "Yes, though we usually use wheat flour. These can make flour too. Good flour." He tipped the seeds into Sarah's palm. "Maybe you show women how." It was a peace offering of sorts, Sarah realized, a chance to contribute meaningfully. And perhaps, a small acknowledgement that her presence might have value beyond the political. "I'll try," she promised, closing her fingers around the seeds. Tomorrow, the strength seeds, as Takoda called them, proved to be a revelation. Sarah spent a morning experimenting with grinding techniques, eventually discovering that roasting the seeds lightly before grinding produced a nutty-flavored flour that mixed well with water to form a workable dough. By midday, she had created several small, flat breads that she cooked on heated stones. Women gathered to watch her work, initially skeptical but increasingly interested as the aroma of baking bread filled the air. When Sarah offered the first samples, the response was cautious enthusiasm. "Good," Niobe pronounced after a thoughtful bite. "Different, but good." Several other women nodded agreement. One, a mother of 3 young children, immediately asked Sarah to show her the technique. By sunset, a small group had gathered for an impromptu cooking lesson, communication bridged by gestures, a few shared words, and Niobe's occasional translations. The success with the seed bread elevated Sarah's status subtly but significantly. Women who had previously ignored her now acknowledged her with nods or brief words. Children brought her interesting stones or feathers they found, proud when she admired their treasures. The drought worsened as days passed. Mornings began with a ritual watching of the sky, hoping for clouds that rarely appeared. The creek that ran near the camp dwindled to a trickle. Without access to the Matthews Spring, the situation would have been dire. "We need better way to catch rain when it comes," Takoda told Sarah one evening as they sat by the communal fire. These conversations had become almost regular, brief exchanges that gradually revealed more of each other's thoughts. "My father built rain barrels at our ranch," Sarah offered. "Large wooden containers that collect water from the roof when it rains. No wood to spare for barrels," Takoda said. "And rain not stay in open basins. Sun drinks it." Sarah considered the problem. What about a pit lined with clay? If it's deep enough and covered when not in use, the water would be protected from the sun. Takoda's expression showed interest. "This works." "I think so," Sarah said. "I read about similar systems in my mother's books about ancient desert peoples." The next morning, Takoda and Sarah surveyed the ground near the camp's edge, looking for a suitable location for the rain-catching basin. They selected a natural depression that could be deepened and lined with the dense clay found near the creek bed. Work began immediately. Men dug the basin deeper while women gathered clay. Sarah found herself working alongside Takoda, demonstrating how to pack the clay to create a waterproof lining. "Like this," she said, smoothing the wet clay with firm, even pressure. No gaps or cracks. Takoda knelt beside her, strong hands mimicking her movements. They worked side by side, the physical proximity both strange and oddly comfortable. When Sarah lost her balance on the slippery clay, Takoda's hand shot out to steady her, gripping her arm firmly. The contact lasted only seconds, but Sarah felt a jolt of awareness course through her. Takoda seemed to feel it too, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly before he released her and returned to his task. "Thank you," Sarah murmured, suddenly conscious of watching eyes. Several women had paused in their work, observing the interaction with various degrees of surprise or disapproval. The basin project continued for 3 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as they were completing the clay lining, a rider approached the camp at speed. The Apache scout slid from his horse, speaking rapidly to the men who gathered to meet him. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the tension that rippled through the group was unmistakable. Takoda's face hardened as he listened, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert in an instant. "What's happening?" Sarah asked Niobe, who had moved to stand beside her. "Rider from settlement," the old woman replied. "Say white men coming." Sarah's heart raced. "Which white men? Why?" Before Niobe could answer, a familiar figure appeared at the camp's edge, James, Sarah's 12-year-old brother, accompanied by 2 young Apache scouts who had clearly intercepted him on his approach. "Sarah," James called, breaking free from his escorts and running toward her. Sarah met him halfway, embracing him tightly. "James, what are you doing here? It's dangerous." Her brother pulled back, face flushed with exertion and emotion. I came to see if you're all right. Father said we couldn't visit, but I had to know. Sarah brushed dust from his hair, noting how much thinner he looked after just a month. I'm fine, truly, but you shouldn't have come alone. I left a note, James said defensively, and I brought something. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small object that gleamed in the sunlight. Their mother's silver locket, a family heirloom Sarah had admired since childhood. Mother wanted you to have this, he said, pressing it into her hand. To remember us. The simple gift brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She fastened the locket around her neck, the cool metal a tangible connection to her family. James looked around nervously, his gaze fixing on Takoda, who stood watching them from a distance. Are you? The boy struggled to form a question he didn't fully understand. I've been treated well, Sarah assured him quickly. No one has harmed me. Relief washed over James's face, followed quickly by renewed concern. You need to know there's trouble brewing. Marshal Wade has been meeting with men from other settlements. They're talking about solving the Apache problem once and for all. Cold fear settled in Sarah's stomach. What does that mean? I don't know exactly, James admitted. But they're gathering guns, Sarah. And Wade keeps saying the water agreement is just temporary, until they're ready. Sarah glanced at Takoda, wondering how much he understood of their English conversation. From his watchful stance, she suspected he comprehended more than he let on. You should go home now, she told James firmly. It's not safe for you here. Come with me, James pleaded. We could both go home. Sarah shook her head. I can't. My leaving would break the peace agreement. But if there's going to be fighting anyway, then I need to be here, Sarah interrupted. I might be able to help prevent it. The certainty in her voice surprised them both. When had her priorities shifted so dramatically? After James's departure, escorted safely to the boundary by two young Apache men at Takoda's order, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of camp, absently fingering her mother's locket. The silver felt cool against her skin, a tangible connection to her past life that now seemed increasingly distant. Your brother brave to come alone, Takoda said, appearing beside her so quietly she startled. Foolish, you mean, Sarah replied. He could have been hurt. Brave and foolish often same thing. A hint of amusement touched Takoda's voice. He love you much to risk. Sarah nodded, throat tight with emotion. I miss them. My family. Natural to miss family. Takoda's gaze swept the horizon where James had disappeared. But brother bring bad news. So he had understood their conversation. Sarah wasn't entirely surprised. Yes, Marshal Wade is planning something against your people. Wade is snake, Takoda said matter-of-factly. Poisonous, but not unexpected. What will you do? Prepare. Watch. Wait. His dark eyes met hers. Your father part of this plan? The question stung, though Sarah understood why he asked it. I don't think so. My father wants peace, not war. He's not a brave man exactly, but he's not cruel. Not cruel enough to sell daughter to enemy? The words could have been mocking, but Takoda's tone held genuine curiosity. Sarah considered carefully. He thought he was saving all of us. That doesn't make it right, but I understand his fear. She touched the locket again. My mother wouldn't have agreed if she thought I'd be mistreated. And you? You think you mistreated here? No, Sarah admitted. I'm not what I expected. What you expect? She hesitated, embarrassed by her preconceptions. Stories in the settlement. They say Apache warriors take white women as slaves. That they force them, Takoda finished when she trailed off. Some do. Some white men force Apache women too. His voice hardened. I not that man. I know that now, Sarah said softly. Niobe say you learn our ways quickly. Speak some Apache words now. Sarah smiled faintly. Just a few. The children are better teachers than they realize. Children see truth before adults, Takoda agreed. No fear until taught. The simple observation resonated with Sarah. How much of her fear had been taught rather than earned? How many of the settlers' beliefs about the Apache were similarly inherited rather than experienced? If Wade comes with guns, she asked, what happens to the peace agreement? Peace needs two sides willing, Takoda replied. If one breaks, agreement broken. The implication hung between them. If fighting broke out, Sarah's purpose here would end. She would no longer be a bridge, a guarantee of peace. I could speak to my father, she offered. Warn him about Wade's plans. Takoda considered this. Dangerous for you to travel now. Wade's men watch trails. Then send me with guards, Sarah persisted. I might be able to convince the settlement that Wade is wrong about your people. And if you leave camp and not return? The question carried multiple layers. Was he questioning her loyalty? Expressing concern for her safety? Or perhaps acknowledging that once home, she might choose to stay? I would return, Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her certainty. I gave my word when I came here. I won't break it. Something shifted in Takoda's expression. A softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a subtle relaxation of his usual reserve. We discuss with council tomorrow. Tonight, rest. As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. Takoda, thank you for sending James home safely. He paused, looking back at her. He is boy becoming man, seeking his path. This I understand. The insight into her brother touched Sarah deeply. You had a son once, didn't you? The question clearly caught Takoda off guard. His expression shuddered momentarily before he asked, Who tell you this? No one directly, Sarah said carefully. But there are whispers. And sometimes I see you watching the young boys at play with longing. Takoda was silent so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled. His name was Ahanu. He laughs. And he did often. A breath, then. He would be 12 winters now. Like your brother. The rare personal revelation felt like a gift. One Sarah hadn't expected and wasn't sure she deserved. I'm sorry for your loss. Old pain, Takoda said, though his eyes suggested the wound remained fresh. Sleep now. Tomorrow bring new troubles. Sarah watched him walk away, struck by how her perception of him had evolved. The fearsome Apache warrior of settler nightmares had become a man with his own griefs, his own principles. Not a savage, but a leader carrying the weight of his people's survival. That night, as she lay on her sleeping mat fingering her mother's locket, Sarah's thoughts were a tangle of conflicting loyalties. She had come here as a Matthews, a reluctant sacrifice to protect her family's interests. But each day, each interaction, each small acceptance into Apache life complicated her position. She fell asleep with the locket clasped in her hand, dreaming of two worlds that no longer seemed entirely separate in her mind. The council did not immediately approve Sarah's request to visit the settlement. Days passed in debate while scouts reported increased activity among the white settlers. Men gathering at Wade's ranch, supplies being stockpiled, rumors of additional guns arriving from Tucson. During this tense waiting period, Sarah found unexpected solace in a new activity. Takoda, perhaps sensing her restlessness, offered to teach her to ride properly on his own horse, a magnificent buckskin stallion named Wanajiska, white spirit in the Lakota language, a nod to Takoda's maternal grandmother's heritage. Horse-nosed riders fear, Takoda explained as they stood in a small clearing beyond the camp. You show fear, horse not trust you. Sarah approached the stallion cautiously. She had ridden before, but only placid ranch horses with proper saddles. Wanajiska wore just a simple bridle and blanket. He's beautiful, she murmured, extending her hand palm up as Takoda had instructed. The horse sniffed her hand, then nudged it gently. Takoda nodded approval. He accept you. Now mount. With Takoda's help, Sarah swung onto the horse's back. The position felt precarious without a saddle security, but Takoda showed her how to grip with her knees, how to balance her weight. Feel horse breathe, he instructed. Move with him, not against. Sarah tried to follow his directions, gradually relaxing as she adjusted to the horse's movements. Takoda walked beside them at first, one hand resting lightly on Wanajiska's neck, the other occasionally steadying Sarah when she wobbled. Good, he said after they had circled the clearing several times. Now we go further. To Sarah's surprise, Takoda swung up behind her on the horse's back, his chest warm against her spine. I hold bridle, he said, his breath tickling her ear. You feel balance. They rode away from camp, following a narrow trail that wound through scrub and cacti. Sarah was acutely aware of Takoda's proximity, the strength of his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, the rhythm of his breathing. The intimacy was both unsettling and oddly comforting. As they crested a rise, the trail opened onto a vista of the desert valley below. In the distance, Sarah could just make out the roof of her family's ranch house, a tiny rectangle of darker color against the desert palette. My home, she said softly, pointing. Was home, Takoda corrected gently. The distinction sent a pang through Sarah's chest, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. The ranch no longer felt like her place in the world, though she wasn't sure the Apache camp fully was either. She existed in a space between, belonging nowhere completely. They rode on, eventually reaching the contested spring. Water bubbled from between rocks, forming a small pool before trickling away down the slope. Desert willows grew along its path, incongruously lush in the arid landscape. Takoda dismounted and helped Sarah down. Rest here, he said, gesturing to a shady spot beneath a willow. Sarah sat gratefully, legs trembling slightly from the unaccustomed riding position. Takoda knelt by the spring, filling a small water skin before joining her in the shade. Beautiful place, Sarah said, accepting a drink from the skin. Sacred place, Takoda agreed. Water is life. Is that why the elders wanted the spring so badly? Because it's sacred. Sacred because it gives life, Takoda clarified. All water sacred in desert. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the gentle gurgle of the spring. A lizard darted over sun-warmed rocks. Hawks circled lazily overhead. Tell me about your wife, Sarah said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. Takoda stiffened slightly, but after a moment he replied. Kimmy was like spring water, clear, strong, bringing life. His voice softened with memory. She laughed much, even when things hard. How did you meet? Her father was healer in our band. She learned his skills. A faint smile touched Takoda's lips. First time I see her, she fixing broken arm of boy who fall from horse. Boy crying. She singing soft song while working, making boy forget pain. The image was vivid and unexpectedly tender. You loved her immediately? Not immediately, Takoda admitted. First I respect her skill. Love come later, slowly. And your son inherited her healing gift? Too young to know, Takoda said, shadows returning to his expression. But he gentle like her, kind to smallest creatures. I'm sorry, Sarah said again inadequately, for what was taken from you. Takoda's gaze turned distant. Cavalry officers say they look for deserter hiding with Apache. They want show force only. Burn lodges. Take horses. His hands clenched. Kimmy try protect children. Officer shoot her. Then chaos. The Stark account stole Sarah's breath. And your son. Smoke. Fire. Many running. When over a Hanu gone. Takoda's voice held carefully controlled pain. Never found body. The grief was too immense for words. Sarah reached out impulsively, covering Takoda's clenched fist with her hand. He looked down at their joined hands with surprise but didn't pull away. They might have remained that way longer, but dark clouds suddenly gathered on the horizon, unusual for the season. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "Storm comes," Takoda said, rising. "We return." They mounted quickly, Takoda again taking position behind Sarah. They had traveled less than halfway back to camp when the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain fell in blinding sheets. Lightning cracked overhead, followed immediately by booming thunder. "Cave ahead!" Takoda shouted over the downpour, directing Wanajiska toward a rocky outcropping. The cave was shallow but dry, providing welcome shelter from the tempest. They sat just inside the entrance, watching curtains of rain transform the desert. Water cascaded down rock faces, forming instant rivulets that carved paths through the thirsty soil. "Good for rain basin," Takoda observed. "Will fill completely." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how close they sat, both partially soaked from the brief exposure. Droplets clung to Takoda's eyelashes and the planes of his face. She resisted a strange urge to reach out and trace the path of a raindrop down his cheek. Something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. In the confines of the small cave, with the storm raging outside, Sarah felt the boundaries that had defined their relationship. Captor and captive, Apache and settler, man and woman, blur and realign. The storm brought more than just needed moisture to the parched land. 2 days later, a delegation from the settlement arrived at the Apache camp. Sarah's father, the storekeeper Mr. Foster, and the settlement's unofficial mayor, Mr. Holloway. They came under a flag of truce, carrying a rolled document that Sarah immediately recognized as trouble. The Apache Council gathered to meet them in the central clearing. Sarah was summoned as well, her heart racing at the unexpected sight of her father. He looked older, more careworn than she remembered, though barely 2 months had passed since their parting. "Sarah," he acknowledged stiffly, eyes widening slightly at her Apache clothing and sun-darkened skin. "You're well." "I am," she replied, conscious of watching eyes from both sides. "Why have you come?" Mr. Holloway stepped forward, unrolling the document with ceremonial gravitas. "We've drafted a formal agreement regarding water rights and territorial boundaries," he announced. "We need it translated for the Apache leader." Sarah glanced at Takoda, who stood with the other Apache men, his expression neutral but watchful. "I can translate," she offered, "though my Apache is still limited." "Niobe help," the old woman said, stepping forward. "Together we make clear." Mr. Holloway nodded and began reading the document aloud. As he spoke, Sarah translated phrase by phrase, with Niobe providing Apache terminology Sarah didn't know. The document outlined specific hours for water access, hunting boundaries, and procedures for addressing future disputes. But midway through, Sarah noticed discrepancies between what Holloway was reading and what was actually written on the page. The written text included restrictions not mentioned aloud, limitations on hunting territories, requirements for Apache to announce themselves when approaching the spring, provisions allowing settlers to use force if terms were violated. Sarah paused, heart pounding. "Mr. Holloway, you're not reading all the terms written here." A tense silence fell. Her father shifted uncomfortably while Holloway's face tightened with annoyance. "Just translate what I've said, Sarah," Holloway directed. "The details aren't important." "They are if you expect them to be binding," Sarah countered, surprising herself with her boldness. She turned to Takoda. "The written agreement contains restrictions he isn't mentioning aloud. It would limit your people more than he's saying." Takoda's eyes narrowed. "What restrictions?" Sarah translated the actual written terms, pointing to each section on the document. The Apache Council members exchanged dark glances as they understood the attempted deception. "You come speaking peace with forked tongue," Elder Ahote said through Niobe's translation. Holloway's face reddened. We're being more than generous with these terms. The water belongs to us by legal right. The law of thirst knows no paper boundaries, Takoda replied evenly. We agreed to share what nature provides. Nothing more. The negotiation deteriorated rapidly after that, with both sides growing increasingly frustrated. Sarah continued translating faithfully, no longer concerned with appeasing the settlement delegation. Her loyalty, she realized with startling clarity, had shifted. As tensions peaked, a commotion at the camp's edge drew everyone's attention. Marshal Wade rode in, flanked by 4 armed men. Seeing him, Sarah's father stood quickly. Wade, what are you doing here? This is a peaceful delegation. Wade dismounted, hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Heard you boys were parleying with the savages. Thought you might need some backup. We didn't ask for backup, Holloway snapped, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Wade's gaze found Sarah, his eyes narrowing at her appearance. Well, Matthew's girl's gone native, I see. His tone made the observation an insult. Takoda stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Wade and Sarah. The movement wasn't overtly threatening, but its protective intent was clear to everyone. Wade noticed, a cruel smile touching his lips. That how it is. The savages gotten fond of his white prize. Marshal Wade, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. You're interrupting official negotiations. Please leave. Official? Wade laughed harshly. Nothing official about giving savages rights they don't deserve. He turned to the settlement men. This water treaty was meant to be temporary, just until we were ready. Ready for what? Sarah's father asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. To solve the Apache problem permanently. Wade's hand tightened on his pistol. Governors signed new orders. Armies authorized to relocate all hostile bands to the reservation at San Carlos. These people aren't hostile, Sarah protested. They've honored every term of the agreement. Girl's been brainwashed, Wade told the others dismissively. Happens to captives sometimes. Start thinking they're one of them. I'm not a captive, Sarah said firmly. I came voluntarily as part of a peace agreement that both sides have respected. Doesn't matter now, Wade replied. New treaty supersedes any local arrangements. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and thrust it at Holloway. Official government document. All Apache in this territory to be relocated within 30 days. The revelation sent a ripple of tension through both groups. Takoda spoke rapidly to his council members before addressing the settlers directly. We not leave ancestral lands, he stated flatly. We not go to San Carlos to die of sickness and hunger. You'll go or be treated as hostiles, Wade countered. Sarah's father finally found his voice. This wasn't our intention, Takoda. The water agreement was made in good faith. Faith break easily, it seems, Takoda replied. Sarah watched the confrontation with growing dread, the fragile peace she represented crumbling before her eyes. When Wade's hand moved from his holster to grip his pistol, she stepped forward without thinking. Enough! This solves nothing. She positioned herself between the two groups. The treaty can be renegotiated. There's no need for threats. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Wade deliberately relaxed his posture, though his eyes remained cold. We'll be back in 1 week for your answer, he told Takoda. Relocation or force. Your choice. As the settlement delegation prepared to leave, Sarah's father approached her. Come home with us, Sarah. Your place is with your family now. The simple statement presented Sarah with the choice she had both longed for and dreaded. Freedom to return home without breaking the peace agreement. Yet something held her back. I need to stay, she said quietly. I can still help prevent bloodshed. Her father's expression showed both disappointment and reluctant understanding. Be careful, daughter. Wade has support in the territorial government. This won't end peacefully if the Apache resist. Then I'll make sure they don't have to resist, Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. There must be another solution. As the settlers rode away, Takoda came to stand beside her. You could have gone, he observed. Why stay? Sarah watched her father's retreating figure, the answer crystallizing in her mind with surprising clarity. Because my work here isn't finished. 3 days after the confrontation, Takoda proposed an unprecedented gathering. Both communities would meet on neutral ground, a flat area halfway between the settlement and Apache camp, to share a meal and discuss alternatives to the relocation order. The Apache would bring game and knowledge of edible desert plants. The settlers would contribute flour, coffee, and vegetables from their gardens. Together, they would demonstrate that coexistence was possible. Breaking bread together builds trust, Sarah had suggested during the council meeting. It's harder to see enemies in those you've shared food with. To her surprise, both Apache elders and several influential settlers embraced the idea. Even her father supported the gathering, though Wade and his followers predictably opposed it. A trap, Wade had declared at the settlement meeting, according to the report brought by Mr. Foster's son. They'll get us all together and slaughter us. But cooler heads had prevailed. The gathering was set for the following day. Sarah spent the morning helping Apache women prepare food for the event. They roasted rabbits and quail, ground mesquite beans into flour for bread, and collected prickly pear fruits to be served with honey. The work was communal, punctuated by conversation that flowed more easily now that Sarah understood more Apache words. You speak well now, Taluta commented as they packed food into carrying baskets. Soon talk like Apache woman. Not that soon, Sarah replied with a smile. I still make many mistakes. Mistakes show learning, Niobe interjected. Not talking makes no mistakes but learns nothing. The old woman's wisdom, as usual, extended beyond language acquisition. Sarah had learned more in these months by immersing herself in Apache life, mistakes and all, than she ever could have as a cautious observer. By midday, both groups had assembled at the meeting place. Blankets were spread on the ground, food arranged in a central area where all could share. Initially, the groups remained largely separated, Apache families on one side, settlers on the other. Sarah, dressed in her Apache clothing but with her mother's locket visible at her throat, moved between them, encouraging interaction. Gradually, the atmosphere relaxed. Children, less burdened by prejudice than their parents, were the first to mingle freely. Settler children marveled at Apache toys and games. Apache children were fascinated by the settlers' store-bought items. Their laughter created a background music that soothed adult tensions. Sarah found herself serving as both translator and cultural interpreter, explaining customs and preventing misunderstandings. The Apache offer food first to the eldest as a sign of respect, she would tell a settler. Or, settlers typically begin meals with a prayer of thanks, she would explain to an Apache observer. Her father watched her work with an expression that mingled pride and bewilderment. When she brought him a piece of mesquite bread, he took her hand briefly. You've changed, he observed. Grown somehow. I've had to, Sarah replied simply. As the meal progressed, informal discussions began about the relocation order. Mr. Holloway, showing unexpected diplomatic skill, suggested a petition to the territorial governor arguing for a local exception. If we document the peaceful arrangement we've maintained, show that there's no need for removal in this specific case, we might succeed, he proposed. Elder Ahote, speaking through Sarah's translation, was cautiously receptive. Words on paper have failed us before, but if both people speak with one voice, perhaps new ears will listen. The discussion continued, gaining momentum as more people contributed ideas. Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps bloodshed could be avoided after all. It was during this hopeful moment that disaster struck. Several Apache children who had been playing near the settler side of the gathering suddenly collapsed, clutching their stomachs and crying in pain. Within minutes, more fell ill, primarily children and elders who had consumed water from the settlers' barrels. Chaos erupted. Apache parents rushed to their suffering children. Accusations flew. The fragile trust shattered instantly. "Poison!" Kim shouted, drawing his knife. "They poison our people." Settlers reached for weapons. Apache warriors moved to defensive positions. The gathering teetered on the edge of violence. "Stop!" Sarah cried, positioning herself between the factions. "This solves nothing. We need to help the sick first." Takoda backed her, issuing sharp commands that stayed his warriors' hands. Together, they organized care for the afflicted, moving them to shade and examining what they had consumed. "Only those who drank from the water barrels are sick," Sarah realized, inspecting the large wooden containers the settlers had brought. She dipped her finger in and detected an unusual bitterness beneath the water's normal taste. Her father joined her examination. "This isn't right," he muttered, sniffing the water. "Smells like copper sulfate. We use it to treat sheep for parasites. In small amounts it's medicine. In large doses, poison," Sarah finished grimly. "But we didn't," her father began. Then his expression darkened with understanding. "Wade." He insisted on providing the water barrels. The revelation spread quickly. Settler women who had unknowingly served the tainted water were horrified. Apache families, seeing their children suffer, demanded justice. Tension exploded when a mounted figure appeared at the gathering's edge. Marshal Wade, come to observe what he clearly expected to be the aftermath of his sabotage. Seeing the communities still largely intact rather than locked in battle, his expression shifted from anticipation to wariness. Takoda saw him too. With a roar of rage, he charged toward Wade, knife drawn. Wade reached for his pistol. The sound of a shot cracked across the gathering. Sarah watched in horror as Takoda stumbled, blood blooming on his upper arm where Wade's bullet had grazed him. Despite the wound, Takoda continued his charge, tackling Wade from his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust as they grappled. Without thinking, Sarah ran toward the fighting men. She was vaguely aware of others moving too. Apache warriors rushing to support their leader, settlers divided between those moving to stop the violence and those backing Wade. Before she could reach them, a second shot rang out. The fighting froze. For one terrible moment, Sarah thought Takoda had been shot again. Then she saw Wade stagger backward, clutching his side where Takoda's knife had found its mark. Not a killing blow, but enough to end the fight. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded with the speed and confusion of a flash flood. Settlers dragged a bleeding Wade away while Apache warriors surrounded Takoda, supporting him as blood soaked his sleeve. Both groups retreated to their respective territories, peace gathering forgotten in the chaos. Sarah found herself torn, literally standing between the receding groups. Her father called to her from one side while Niobe beckoned urgently from the other. The choice required only a moment's consideration. Takoda was wounded, and the Apache children still suffered from the poisoned water. "I'm sorry," she called to her father. "I have to help them." She ran to join the Apache, falling in beside Talyuta, who was carrying a moaning child. The procession moved quickly back to camp, warriors maintaining defensive positions around the vulnerable. At the camp, organized chaos prevailed. The ill were laid in the shade while those with healing knowledge assessed their conditions. Takoda, despite his own injury, moved among them, speaking quiet words of encouragement. "You need care too," Sarah told him, eyeing the blood-soaked sleeve. "Others first," he replied tersely. Sarah respected his decision but gathered supplies to treat him when he would finally allow it. Niobe showed her which healing herbs would help both the wounded and the poisoned. A mixture of activated charcoal from the fire pits, combined with a particular clay found near the creek, could help absorb the poison if given quickly enough. Together, they prepared the remedy and administered it to the sick. Some children vomited immediately, their bodies expelling the toxin. Others lay listless, burning with fever as their systems fought the poison. One elderly man, eyes like sky, seemed particularly affected. His breathing grew labored, his skin ashen. Niobe worked over him tirelessly, murmuring prayers and applying poultices. Sarah helped as best she could, wiping his brow with cool cloths and supporting his head when he needed to drink. It was near dusk when Eyes Like Sky's breathing eased and his fever broke. Niobe sat back on her heels, exhaustion etched in every line of her ancient face. "He live," she pronounced. "Others too. Poison strong but not enough to kill." "Thank God," Sarah murmured. Niobe gave her a sidelong glance. "Your God help, my spirits help. All work together today." The simple acknowledgement of their different beliefs working in harmony touched Sarah deeply. Yes, all work together. With the immediate crisis stabilized, Sarah finally turned her attention to Takoda. She found him sitting alone by a small fire, examining his wounded arm with stoic detachment. "Let me help," she said, kneeling beside him with her supplies. To her surprise, he didn't object. She cut away the blood-stiffened sleeve to reveal a deep graze along his upper arm. The bullet had torn through flesh but missed bone and major blood vessels. A painful wound but not life-threatening if infection could be prevented. Sarah cleaned the wound carefully, using the knowledge she'd gained from watching Niobe and from her mother's basic medical teachings. Takoda remained silent throughout her ministrations, his only reaction an occasional tightening of his jaw when she probed particularly tender areas. "Why did you stay?" he asked suddenly as she applied a poultice of healing herbs. Sarah's hands paused momentarily before resuming their work. "The children needed help. You needed help. Could have gone with your father. Been safe. I couldn't leave knowing Wade had poisoned your people," Sarah replied. "That would make me complicit." Takoda studied her face in the firelight. "Your people not blame you for Apache problems. Maybe not, but I would blame myself." She began wrapping his arm with clean cloth strips. "Besides, I'm not sure where my people are anymore." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Sarah secured the bandage and sat back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. The two of them alone by the fire, her hands on his skin, the unspoken current that had been building between them for weeks. Takoda reached out with his uninjured arm, his fingers lightly touching the locket at her throat. "You wear reminder of old family, but live with new family now." "I'm somewhere in between," Sarah said softly, "not fully belonging to either world. Sometimes between places is where truth lives." Takoda's hand moved from the locket to gently touch her cheek. "You brave today. Honor both peoples with your actions." The praise warmed her more than it should have. Sarah was acutely conscious of his touch, of the way his dark eyes reflected the firelight, of her own quickening pulse. The moment was interrupted by Keem's arrival. The warrior's face was tight with anger as he reported to Takoda in rapid Apache. Sarah caught only fragments, words about the settlement, about Wade, about preparations. Takoda listened intently, his expression hardening. When Keem finished, Takoda rose, all trace of the earlier tenderness gone. "Wade tells settlement we attack first," he explained to Sarah. "Says we poisoned our own children to create excuse for violence." "That's insane," Sarah protested. "Who would believe that?" "Those who want to believe," Takoda replied grimly. "Those who want excuse for war. My father knows the truth. Mr. Holloway and others saw what happened. Keem says your father speaks truth, but Wade has many supporters. Some settlers prepare weapons now." Takoda flexed his injured arm, testing its strength. "We must prepare too." "For what? Surely you're not considering fighting. If they come with guns, we not sit waiting for death." Takoda's voice was resigned rather than eager. "We defend our people." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. The Apache were brave and skilled, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Open conflict would be devastating for all, but especially for Takoda's people. There must be another way, she insisted. Let me go to the settlement. I can testify to what really happened. Too dangerous now. Takoda shook his head. Wade's men watch trails. They already call you traitor for staying with Apache. Then what? We just wait for violence to find us. Takoda considered her question seriously. Not wait, prepare, and hope wiser minds in settlement prevent foolish action. As he spoke, Takoda swayed slightly, the blood loss and day's exertions finally taking their toll. Sarah quickly moved to support him, her arm around his waist. You need rest, she said firmly. The wound isn't deadly, but fever could be if you don't allow your body to heal. For once, Takoda didn't argue. He allowed Sarah to help him to his wickiup, his usual reserve weakened by exhaustion and perhaps by the evolving trust between them. Takoda's recovery was swift but incomplete. 3 days after the confrontation, he resumed most of his duties, though Sarah noticed he favored his injured arm and occasionally winced when he thought no one was watching. The wound showed no signs of infection, a blessing Sarah attributed to Niobe's herbal poultices and perhaps a bit to her own careful tending. The camp existed in a state of tense readiness. Warriors took turns standing watch. Women prepared travel packs containing essential items, ready to evacuate if necessary. Children were kept close to the camp center, their usual wandering curtailed by the palpable sense of danger. News from the settlement came sporadically through Apache scouts who observed from a distance. Wade had survived his wound and was using it to further inflame anti-Apache sentiment. Some settlers, including Sarah's father and Mr. Holloway, continued to speak against violence, but their voices were increasingly drowned out by calls for decisive action. On the morning of the 4th day, a scout returned to camp at a full gallop, his horse lathered with exertion. The young Apache slid from his mount and ran directly to where Takoda sat in council with the elders. Sarah, grinding herbs nearby with Niobe, couldn't hear the conversation but saw Takoda's expression darken as he listened. When the council dispersed, Takoda motioned for Sarah to join him. Wade gathers men, he told her without preamble. 20, maybe more. They clean guns, check ammunition. Scout says they plan to come at dawn tomorrow. Sarah's heart sank. To relocate you by force? Perhaps. Or worse. Takoda's jaw tightened. Wade tells them Apache plan attack on settlement. Says we must be stopped first. It's a lie, Sarah said. He's creating the very threat he claims to be preventing. Truth matters little now. Fear speaks louder. Takoda looked across the camp where women continued their preparations, faces set with grim determination. We must decide. Fight, flee, or surrender. Fighting would be suicide, Sarah argued. They outnumber you and have better weapons. Surrender means San Carlos, Takoda countered. Many die there from sickness, hunger, broken spirit. Slow death instead of quick. Then flee. Move deeper into Apache territory until this passes. Takoda shook his head. Government hunters would follow, and winter comes soon. Without prepared food stores, many would not survive, especially children and elders. The impossible choice hung between them. Sarah felt the weight of it pressing on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. These people, who had become her people in many ways, faced extinction regardless of their choice. There must be another way, she insisted, the phrase becoming a desperate refrain. Takoda studied her face. You have idea? Maybe. Sarah's mind raced, fragments of possibility coalescing. What if we could prove Wade's treachery? Show the settlers he deliberately poisoned the water to provoke conflict. How prove this? The water barrels. They must still have traces of the poison, and my father recognized it as copper sulfate, something used for treating sheep. Wade doesn't have sheep, but he would have access to the chemical through the general store. Takoda considered this. Evidence might convince some settlers. Not enough to stop Wade now. But enough to give us time, Sarah pressed. If my father and Mr. Holloway had proof, they could appeal directly to the territorial authorities, possibly even get the relocation order suspended pending investigation. Dangerous plan, Takoda observed. Someone must go to settlement, find evidence, bring back. I'll go, Sarah said immediately. Too risky. Wade's men watch trails. They'll be watching for Apache, not for me. And I know the settlement. Know where to look and who to trust. Takoda's expression showed reluctance warring with recognition of the plan's potential. You would go alone? No, Sarah decided. I need someone who knows the land, who can help me travel unseen. She met his gaze directly. I need you. Surprise flickered across Takoda's features. Wade would recognize me instantly. Not if you stay hidden outside town. I'll do the work in the settlement, but I need your guidance to get there safely and your protection on the journey. A long silence followed as Takoda weighed the proposal. Finally, he nodded once, decision made. We leave at dusk. Travel by night. Reach settlement before dawn. Safer that way. Relief flooded Sarah, followed immediately by apprehension. The plan was desperate, with slim chances of success, but it offered hope where none had existed before. Word spread quickly through the camp. Some, like Keem, argued vehemently against Takoda leaving at such a critical time. Others, particularly the elders who had seen too many conflicts end in Apache suffering, supported the attempt at a peaceful solution. Niobe helped Sarah prepare, providing a small medicine pouch containing herbs for strength and clarity. For clear thinking when path dark, she explained, tying it to Sarah's belt. As dusk approached, Sarah changed back into her original white dress, now clean but still bearing the mended tear from her early days in camp. The garment felt foreign after months in Apache clothing, but she knew it would help her move through the settlement without immediately drawing attention. Takoda appeared as the sun touched the western horizon, leading 2 horses. He had exchanged his usual attire for plainer clothing that might pass for a Mexican vaqueros from a distance. A cloth wrapped around the lower portion of his face would further conceal his identity if they encountered anyone on the trail. Ready? He asked simply. Sarah nodded, unable to fully articulate the tumult of emotions. Fear, determination, and something deeper that surged when she looked at this man who had transformed in her perception from captor to protector to something far more complex. As they prepared to mount, a young Apache boy ran toward them, clutching something in his hand. He spoke rapidly to Takoda, who listened with unusual attention before accepting the object. A small arrow, its shaft decorated with intricate markings. Message arrow, Takoda explained, securing it carefully in his saddlebag. Tradition when warriors undertake dangerous mission. Carries prayers for safe return. The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on Sarah. This wasn't just a practical expedition. It was a last hope for survival, carrying the prayers and futures of an entire community. They mounted as the first stars appeared, riding away from camp with the weight of impossible expectations on their shoulders. Behind them, the Apache began a low, rhythmic chant that followed them into the gathering darkness. A song of protection, of safe journeys, of hoped for return. The journey to the settlement was tense but uneventful. Takoda led them along hidden trails, avoiding the main paths where Wade might have posted lookouts. They traveled mostly in silence, speaking only when necessary, each lost in private thoughts about what awaited them. As the eastern sky began to pale with approaching dawn, the settlement came into view, a collection of rough buildings huddled together on the desert plain. From their vantage point on a low rise, Sarah could see movement already, lanterns bobbing as early risers began their day. I go no further, Takoda said, dismounting in a small copse of mesquite trees. Too dangerous. Sarah slid from her horse, suddenly reluctant to leave his side. The plan had seemed straightforward during formulation. Now, facing its execution alone, doubts crowded her mind. What if I can't find evidence? What if Wade has disposed of the barrels? Trust your instincts, Takoda replied. You see with clear eyes now. The simple confidence in his assessment steadied her. I'll try to be back before midday. If I'm not, I wait until dark, he assured her. Not leave without you. Sarah nodded, gathering her courage. On impulse, she reached out and touched Takoda's hand. Be careful. His fingers curled briefly around hers, warm and strong. You also. With that brief exchange, Sarah turned and began walking toward the settlement, the white dress making her a pale ghost in the pre-dawn light. She kept to the shadows where possible, avoiding the main street. Her destination was clear. Her family's ranch first, to enlist her father's help, then to find the evidence of Wade's treachery. The ranch was quiet as she approached. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting her mother was already awake, preparing breakfast. Sarah hesitated at the edge of the yard, suddenly unsure of her welcome. How would her family receive her after all this time? Would they see her as a daughter returned or as an Apache sympathizer? Before she could resolve her doubts, the door opened and James stepped out, heading toward the barn on early morning chores. He stopped abruptly when he spotted her, dropping the bucket he carried. Sarah? His voice cracked with disbelief. James, she replied softly. Yes, it's me. Her brother covered the distance between them in seconds, embracing her fiercely. You're alive. You're here. I need to speak with Father, Sarah said, returning his embrace but keeping focused on her mission. Is he awake? I'll get him, James replied, then hesitated. Are you back for good? The question pierced her. I don't know, she answered honestly. Much depends on what happens today. James looked confused but nodded, running back to the house. Moments later, Thomas Matthews emerged, hastily pulling on a shirt. He stopped at the sight of his daughter, emotions warring on his weathered face. Sarah. Her name emerged as a half-whisper. Father. She stepped forward. I don't have much time. Wade is planning to attack the Apache camp at dawn tomorrow. We need your help. We. Her father's expression sharpened. You've come from them? Yes, Sarah acknowledged. And I'll return to them if I can. But first, I need to prove Wade poisoned the water barrels at the gathering. Her father's shoulders sagged slightly. I suspected as much. The way the children fell ill, the bitter taste. He shook his head. But Wade's gathered significant support. Even if we prove his treachery, many won't care. They want the Apache gone by any means. They should care that he poisoned children, Sarah insisted. That he's willing to commit murder to start a war. They should. Her father agreed wearily. But fear and hatred run deep. Wade's been stirring both for weeks. Sarah felt desperation rising. We have to try. The water barrels? Do you know where they are? Likely at the livery stable. Wade stores equipment there. Then that's where I need to go. Will you help me? Her father studied her face, noting the changes that months among the Apache had wrought. The sun-darkened skin, the quiet confidence, the unwavering determination. You care for them, he observed. These people who were supposed to be your captors. They were never my captors, Sarah replied. You gave me to them as a peace offering, but they gave me respect, purpose. They became my friends. Some. She hesitated, thinking of Takoda. Some became more. Understanding dawned in her father's eyes. The Apache leader, Takoda. Sarah didn't deny it. He's a good man, father. Better than many who call themselves civilized. Thomas Matthews rubbed his face, the gesture revealing his exhaustion and internal conflict. Finally, he nodded decisively. Get inside quickly. Your mother should see you're safe, then we'll go to town. William has been helping at the livery. He might know exactly where the barrels are kept. Relief surged through Sarah. Thank you. Her reunion with her mother was brief but emotional. Martha Matthews cried silently as she embraced her daughter, touching her face as if to confirm she was real. William, now 10, regarded her with shy curiosity, as though she were a stranger wearing his sister's face. "You look like an Indian," he blurted finally. "Apache," Sarah corrected gently. "And I've learned their ways, yes." Her mother wiped away tears. "Are you hungry? I can make breakfast." "No time," Thomas interrupted. "Sarah needs our help, and we haven't much time. Wade plans to move against the Apache tomorrow at dawn." Martha's expression hardened with unexpected resolve. "Then we must stop him. What can I do?" "Stay here with James," Thomas replied. "William, Sarah, and I are going to town. If anyone asks, I'm showing William how to repair the wagon wheel." As they prepared to leave, Thomas retrieved his rifle from above the fireplace. Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Just in case," he said grimly. "Wade's not a man to confront unarmed." They took the wagon to avoid suspicion, Sarah hiding beneath a tarp in the back while her father and brother sat up front. As they approached the settlement, Sarah's heart pounded with tension. So much depended on what they might find, on whether they could convince others of Wade's deception before it was too late. The fate of Takoda, of his people, and of the fragile understanding Sarah had helped build between two worlds now rested on the slim hope of justice prevailing over hatred. She clutched her mother's locket for courage, silently vowing that she would not fail those who waited in the desert for her return. The livery stable smelled of hay and horse, familiar scents that momentarily transported Sarah back to her life before everything changed. William led them confidently through the dim interior, pointing to a back corner behind stacked feed sacks. "Wade's things are there," he whispered. "Mr. Collins doesn't ask questions when Wade stores stuff." Thomas kept watch near the entrance while Sarah and William searched the corner. Behind several crates, they found them, the water barrels from the gathering, hastily hidden rather than properly cleaned or destroyed. "Here," Sarah whispered, examining the interior of one barrel. A bluish residue clung to the wood near the bottom. She dipped her finger cautiously, then sniffed. "This is it. The same bitter smell." Thomas joined them, nodding grimly at the evidence. Copper sulfate, without doubt, and more than would ever be used for medicinal purposes. This was deliberate poisoning. "We need to show Mr. Holloway," Sarah said, "and anyone else who might stand against Wade." "Holloway's likely at the general store this time of morning," Thomas replied. "But we need to be careful. Wade has men throughout town." They transferred a sample of the residue to a small glass jar, then slipped out of the livery. The town was fully awake now, streets filling with morning activity. Sarah kept her head down, painfully aware that her appearance had changed enough to draw attention from anyone who knew her before. They were halfway to the general store when a voice called out behind them. "Matthews, hold up there." Thomas turned slowly, positioning himself to shield Sarah. Marshal Wade approached, flanked by two hard-faced men. His side was clearly still troubling him. He walked with a slight limp and favored his injured side. "Morning, Wade," Thomas said neutrally. "Early business in town?" Wade's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Could ask you the same." His gaze shifted, catching sight of Sarah despite Thomas's attempt to shield her. Recognition dawned, followed by ugly anger. "Well, well, the Apache's woman returns." "I'm my own woman," Sarah replied steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Wade ignored her, addressing Thomas. "You harboring a traitor now, Matthews? Your daughter's been living with savages, maybe even helped them plan attacks on decent folk." "The only attack being planned is yours, Wade," Thomas countered. "We know what you did with the water barrels." A flicker of unease crossed Wade's face before his expression hardened. "Don't know what you're talking about." "The copper sulfate you used to poison children," Sarah said, voice rising. "We found the barrels you hid at the livery." People on the street had stopped to listen, a small crowd gathering at the confrontation. Wade's eyes darted around, calculating. "Girl's been brainwashed by the Apache," he announced loudly to the onlookers, making wild accusations to protect her savage friends. "We have proof," Thomas insisted, holding up the glass jar with its damning blue residue. "And we're taking it to Holloway and anyone else with the decency to care about poisoning children." Wade's hand moved to his gun. "You're not taking that anywhere." Before he could draw, another voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Wade." Mr. Holloway pushed through the crowd, his considerable authority evident in the way people moved aside for him. "I've heard rumors about those water barrels for days. If Matthews has evidence, I aim to see it." More settlers gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Sarah recognized faces from the peace gathering, people who had seen the children fall ill, who had begun to believe coexistence was possible before Wade's sabotage. "It's a trick," Wade insisted desperately. "The Apache poisoned their own kids to turn us against each other. They're planning to attack at dawn tomorrow. My scout confirmed it." "Your scout is lying, just like you," Sarah declared. "The Apache are preparing to defend themselves because they know you're planning to attack them." The standoff might have continued, but nature intervened in an unexpected way. The morning sky, which had been clear at dawn, began to darken unusually fast. People looked up in confusion as daylight dimmed. "An eclipse?" Holloway murmured, awe in his voice. "The almanac predicted it, but I'd forgotten." The phenomenon commanded everyone's attention as darkness fell over the landscape in mid-morning. Stars appeared in the suddenly night-like sky, a perfect black disk where the sun should be, ringed by ethereal light. In the strange twilight, a horse's hoofs pounded down the main street. Settlers gasped as a rider appeared. Takoda, no longer concealing his identity, urgency having overcome caution. He reined his horse to a stop near Sarah, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the crowd. "Apache come," he announced grimly. "Keem leads warriors. Think you captured, maybe killed. Come to rescue." "No!" Sarah's blood ran cold. "We have to stop them. This could be a massacre." Wade seized the moment of confusion, drawing his gun and aiming at Takoda. "See? They're attacking, just like I warned." Thomas Matthews moved faster than Sarah had ever seen, raising his rifle. "Lower your weapon, Wade." Other men drew guns, some pointing at Wade, others at Takoda, alliances dividing the crowd. In the eclipse's eerie light, the scene took on a surreal quality, as though time itself had paused at this critical juncture. "Stop!" Sarah stepped into the center of the confrontation, hands raised. "This solves nothing. Look at us. Ready to kill each other while the sun itself hides its face in shame." Her words, spoken in the strange silence of the eclipse, seemed to penetrate the tension. People lowered their weapons slightly, looking uncertainly between her, Wade, and Takoda. Holloway seized the opening. "The girl's right. We need truth, not bloodshed." He took the jar from Thomas's hand, examining the residue. "This matches what I saw in those barrels, Wade. Children suffering, vomiting up blue-tinged water. You'd take the word of Apache lovers over a white man who's protected this settlement for years?" Wade snarled, desperation edging his voice. "I'd take truth over lies, no matter who speaks them," Holloway replied steadily. "And I've had my doubts about you for some time, Wade." As the eclipse reached totality, the settlement stood divided, not cleanly between pro-Apache and anti-Apache factions as Wade had engineered, but between those willing to consider evidence and those clinging to hatred regardless of facts. In that suspended moment, with the world balanced between light and dark, Sarah moved to stand beside Takoda. The symbolism wasn't lost on the watching settlers. The rancher's daughter and the Apache warrior, united despite every force that should have separated them. "There's Apache approaching from the east," someone called from the edge of town. "At least a dozen warriors." Keem, Takoda confirmed grimly. Wade saw his opportunity slipping away. With a roar of fury, he fired at Takoda. Sarah screamed as Takoda jerked backward, but he remained seated on his horse. The bullet had missed its mark in the strange eclipse light. Before Wade could fire again, multiple guns trained on him. Not just Thomas Matthews' rifle, but weapons held by settlers who had finally seen enough. "Drop it, Wade," Holloway commanded. "It's over." For a tense moment, Wade seemed ready to shoot regardless of consequences. Then, with a curse, he lowered his weapon. The eclipse began to wane, light gradually returning to the world. In that emerging brightness, Sarah turned to Takoda. "We need to stop Keem before there's bloodshed." Takoda nodded, extending his hand to her. Without hesitation, Sarah mounted behind him, arms circling his waist. Together they rode out to meet the approaching Apache warriors, a living symbol of the peace both had risked everything to preserve. 1 month later, Sarah stood at the edge of what had once been disputed territory, watching Apache and settler children play together near the spring. The water flowed strong after the unexpected rains that had followed the eclipse day, enough for both communities to share without hardship. Wade had been taken to Tucson to face charges of attempted murder and inciting violence. His influence had unraveled quickly once evidence of his poisoning scheme came to light. The territorial governor, responding to a detailed petition from both communities, had suspended the relocation order pending further review. Peace remained fragile, built on cautious trust rather than formal treaties. But it was peace nonetheless, sustained by people on both sides who had glimpsed a better way forward. "Hard to believe," Thomas Matthews said, joining his daughter at the boundary marker. "2 months ago, I thought giving you to the Apache was our only chance for survival. Now we're building an irrigation system together." Sarah smiled, watching the complex network of ditches and small dams that would direct water to both the settlement and Apache lands. People can accomplish remarkable things when they work together instead of against each other. Her father nodded, a shadow of old regret crossing his features. "I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you, Sarah." "I've forgiven you," she replied simply. "And in a strange way, I'm grateful. I would never have known this life otherwise." Her gaze drifted to where Takoda worked alongside settler men, his quiet competence earning grudging respect even from former adversaries. Thomas followed her gaze, understanding what remained unspoken. "You've made your choice, then?" "I have." Sarah touched her mother's locket, which still hung around her neck. "I'll always be your daughter. I'll visit often. But my place is with him now, with his people who have become my people too." "Your mother cried when I told her," Thomas admitted. "But she understands, I think. She always saw more clearly than I did." "And James? William? They'll miss their sister. But this new arrangement means they can see you without crossing forbidden boundaries." He hesitated. Will there be a ceremony?" Sarah nodded. "Next full moon. An Apache ceremony, but Niobe says friends from both communities are welcome." Her father squeezed her shoulder awkwardly. "We'll be there." As evening approached, Sarah made her way to where Takoda stood examining the newly completed main irrigation channel. He acknowledged her approach with the slight softening of expression that she had learned to recognize as his smile. "It will work," he said, indicating the channel. "When rains come, water flows to all." "A good metaphor," Sarah replied, slipping her hand into his. Takoda nodded thoughtfully. "Your father accepted your decision?" "He has. They'll come for the ceremony." Relief flickered briefly across Takoda's face. Though he would never admit it, Sarah knew her family's acceptance mattered to him. Not for his sake, but for hers. "Come," he said. "Something to show you." He led her to a small plot of land near the spring, where freshly turned earth had been marked with neat rows. Small green shoots emerged from some sections, while others showed only recently planted seeds. "Garden," Takoda explained. "Apache plants here." He pointed to sections where corn, beans, and squash grew together in traditional companion planting. Settler plants here. He indicated rows of tomatoes, carrots, and other vegetables familiar from Sarah's mother's garden. Growing together, Sarah murmured, understanding the symbolism. Niobe's idea, Takoda admitted. Old woman very wise. Sarah knelt to touch the soil where the different plantings met, mingling at their edges. Will they thrive, do you think? These plants from different worlds. Takoda joined her, his hand covering hers in the earth. With proper care, yes. Different does not mean cannot live together. Grow stronger together. The simple wisdom resonated deeply. Sarah looked up at the man beside her, the fearsome Apache warrior who had refused to claim what was offered, who had protected rather than exploited, who had seen value in her beyond her role as a peace token. The last light of sunset gilded his features, softening the scar that had once seemed so fearsome to her. In his dark eyes, she saw not the savage of settler nightmares, but a man of profound honor, of gentle strength, of hard-won wisdom. I brought something for the garden, Sarah said, reaching into the pouch at her belt. She withdrew a small square of white fabric, a piece cut from her original dress, the one she had worn as an offering months ago. For remembering? Takoda asked, watching as she tied it to a small stake at the garden's edge. For transforming, Sarah corrected. What began as sacrifice becomes choice. What was taken becomes freely given. Takoda's hand closed around hers, warm and sure. As twilight deepened around them, they remained by the garden where two worlds grew together, their silhouettes merging into one against the vast desert sky. Months later, visitors to the unusual settlement would note a curious sight. A small cradle board hanging outside an Apache dwelling near the boundary spring, lined with soft white fabric from a dress once worn by a frightened girl who had become a bridge between worlds.